Hey, cool kids. This week's guest is Helen Ellis. Now, Helen is joining us to talk about how families that are at a distance can build and maintain really strong relationships. We don't have to worry about geography being such a barrier anymore. Helen is going to talk to us about the importance of not only just being a grandparent that loves grandkids from a distance, but how you can really influence that relationship and get over that hurdle of being a long ways away. Before we get started, I want to remind you, please go check out the Cool Grandpa bookstore. There's great hats. Spring and summer are right around the corner. In fact, spring's already here. Down here in Georgia, we're already getting into temperatures in the 80s. So, great ball cap with the Cool Grandpa logo might just be the thing to protect your noggin, as well as give you a little eye relief during the hot summer days. So go over to the Cool Grandpa bookstore, check out the merchandise that's there. Another great way to support the program is to go to buymeacoffee.com/coolgrandpa. And I've got a link to that into the show notes as well. And you can donate $5 or $50 if you want, just to help offset the costs of this podcast. So, hey, enough talk. Let's get into this conversation with Helen. Helen Ellis, welcome to the Cool Grandpa podcast. I'm excited to have you on.
Thank you for having me, Greg. It's great to be here.
Now, I will point out for our North American audience that you have an accent that might tip your hand, that you're not from Southern California, let's say.
That's true. I'm sitting in Auckland, New Zealand, and today is Wednesday for me, and it's Tuesday for you. And it's summer for me, and it's winter for you.
It is. Although I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, which is the southeast part of the country, and we're starting to warm up ourselves already. So,
well, how did we not know that, Greg? Because my daughter lives in Atlanta, so I know Atlanta.
Okay. Yeah.
In fact,
I don't know.
You can see a picture behind me of Decatur. Just there's a little the logo.
Yep, there it is. Oh my, that's funny. Well, next time you come through town, you'll have to let me know, and we'll have to grab coffee together or something.
Okay, that sounds great. That's crazy.
It is. Now, Helen, I have you on because you've written a couple of, 3 books about distant families and those relationships, and I'd love for you to give us a little bit of background about yourself. And then let's talk about, how did you get into writing about distant families?
Well, it's a little bit of a long story, so I'll make it as short as I can. Over in 1989, remarried for the second time, and my husband remarried, and we had a blended family. And my husband is older than me. So when we got married, our kids were 3 and 4 and 19 and 20. Let me just show you, I don't know if this will work, but let me just see if I can show you a really weird. This was us on our wedding day. So we were a pretty weird family. And my stepson, who, when he was 21, decided to head off to England for his working holiday. It's a sort of rite of passage, a lot of New Zealanders do. And he never came back, except there is another PS postscript to that story, which we've got time I can share with you. So he's been in England over 30 odd years. And he has 2 children over there who are 23 and 26. So when I was about 40, I became a step-grandmother by distance. And then my stepdaughter, my husband's daughter, she married a Scotsman, and they headed off. They lived in Scotland, but she came back and has a couple of kids. And then my children got a bit older, and one of them married an American and worked all around the world, and she lives in Atlanta. And the other one won. I'm not sure if listeners even know this exists, but there is such a thing as you can win a green card. They have a lottery system. And my son, lucky me, his name came out and he lives in Chicago. So we have, I've always said in my bio that 3 of our 4 children and 6 of our 7 grandchildren lived 16 to 30 hours flight away. So that's my personal circumstances. And when I was in my 50s, I decided I'd run businesses, done all sorts of things, and I thought I need to do something different. So I took myself off to university. I had never gone to university when I left school. It wasn't a Kiwi thing very much. Well, it was, but it wasn't in my circles. And I just got into the travel industry and did all sorts of things there. And so I took myself off to university, decided I would do a Bachelor of Arts. I decided to major in social anthropology because I'd come from the travel industry and that was my thing. And towards the end of the degree, my professor said to me, okay, Helen, we were doing a paper on how to prepare a research proposal. So she said to me, if you were to do your master's, what would you do it on? And I said, I'm out of here. There's no way I'm hanging around. I've done this degree part-time. It's taken years and years, and I'm out of here. But anyway, I had to do the task. So often if you do your master's, often you focus on something that actually means something to you. And so I was interested in societies and how societies worked with other societies. And I decided that the generations of distant families were kind of like societies. So I thought I could do it on that. So I had to do some research to find out what was out there in the world, and there was next to nothing. And then I found out that here in New Zealand, we have a staggering statistic. We're up there with the Irish. Roughly 20% of everybody born in New Zealand now lives overseas. Now, that's a staggering percentage. And allowing for the fact that we sit in our own time zone, that means that everyone is in a different time zone. With that statistic in mind, I found out that not one single academic in New Zealand had ever written about what I went on to call distance families, transnational families, families spread around the world or the globe. So I realized there was a vacancy. So all of that meant that I ended up by deciding to do my master's so I could get some letters after my name and not be the granny from New Zealand. And I decided that the world needed a mainstream book series because there was next to nothing out there. And that's how it happened. It wasn't because I have a great passion for writing. I'd never done anything like that before in my life, but I just felt the world needed a body of knowledge that could hopefully then introduce more conversation. So that's what I did. I just decided to do it as COVID arrived and we thought we were going to go and visit our kids, and I had just submitted my master's and we had to cancel a visit. I started in 2020 and then have published the last one this year. So that's how it came about.
Wow, it's so interesting that nobody had tackled that subject before at the school you were in.
Yeah, I mean, there is, some academic scholarship out there, and I've, quoted it wherever I can. But when you consider how prolific this is as a social phenomenon, why is it? And when I wrote the last book, Being a Distance Grandchild, the subject of grandchildhood is just about under the radar in academia. I found one Czech Republic scholar who had written on the subject of grandchildhood, and she commented as well how little there was out there, and she quoted some figures. She did a survey of titles, subjects, and abstracts of transnational academic research, and she found 47 references to grandparenthood and 18 one grandchildhood. So with that, I thought, well, you can sort of do what you want, Helen, because there's not much out there.
Right.
So it's been a great journey.
Well, the nice thing is that anybody following along in your academic footsteps, you're going to be one of the references that they pull out and that they cite. And they either are going to concur with what you found or they're going to argue against what you found with maybe new data.
Yes, and all I'll have is an MA next to my name and nothing grander. So.
But that's how all this gets started too. So
yes,
this is great stuff. Now, we talked a little bit about the step grandparenting aspect, and you've tackled it from both sides. How have you been able to really look at maybe your husband's experience and your experience and other people's as well on that question of being a distance grandparent from both that grandfather grandmother side?
I think this is a really interesting question because blended families of every variety are just so common now, and every family situation is different, and it's just like every distance family situation is different. When we got married, both our exes were kind of not on the scene. So, in practical terms, mine moved to Australia, which is a 3 hour flight away, and my husband's ex wife was not on the scene very much as well. And he had brought up his kids for 15 years by himself. We, our attitude was yours are mine and mine are yours. And, but we also never wanted to ever try and replace, their natural birth mother and father. We were never ever trying to do that. My own children took his surname soon into it because they were quite little. And we've always tried to be, I've just been a good friend for my step adult children. And Clive has been an amazing father for my children because they were so young. And when it came to the grandchildren, well, I'd have to say, when I was 40 and my first step grandchild was born on the other side of the world, it did feel a bit weird because I had teenagers at home. But I'd also been surrounded by traditional, parents in my own, well, sort of, in my own life. And I just felt just because I was younger and just because I was on the other side of the world and just because I wasn't a blood relative, that didn't mean that those kids on the other side of the world didn't deserve grandparents. It, I mean, I married their granddad well before they were born. So, as far as I was concerned, I was a regular grandmother. I didn't have a granny name. They all, my step grandchildren, who are, as I say, I've got two 23-year-olds and two 26-year-olds, and they all call me Helen, and it's been like that since day one. But and interestingly, one of them wrote a story for me, wrote her own story in the grandchild book. And one of the things she said was that, I've always been a regular grandmother to her. She doesn't think of me as anything else and sees it as a blessing that she's got more grandparents than most. And then my husband has been an absolute full on, hands on grandfather for my blood grandchildren, and they are aged 2, the 2-year-olds in Chicago, and in Atlanta I've got a 9 and 11-year-old. So we've had them stay, we've been to them, and they are granddad. So we've just treated everything as even, and I think in some respects the fact that our exes weren't sort of super active on the scene has probably made things sometimes easier, I think. I mean, you never get a break, but sometimes easier. So I've just really loved I think it's been a real privilege to be a step grandparent, and I have lovely relationships with all my grandkids. They're all completely different, and you've had to sort of stand back and not put them all in the same box. Their personalities, their ways of doing things, all completely different. And I've really been grateful for the journey, and my life is significantly richer as I look at people, grandmothers who are similar age to me, who are, busy looking after a 3 and a 4-year-old. I'm going, man, I've been doing this for over 20, 26 years. So it's been a lot of living, and my life has been very much richer for it. So yeah, that's our step sort of activity.
Well, thank you for sharing that. It's always amazing to hear everybody's stories about how families come together. It's just one of the things that we can learn about, and it's one of the things that I think as relationships can sometimes go and people move on different paths, to know that it's possible to have that sense of family, that sense of love and community, regardless of what path you end up on.
Exactly. Absolutely. And you just embrace your circumstances and make the most of it. I can tell you it wasn't all bed of roses. We've worked jolly hard at this, and there've been lots of challenging times and different personalities, but everybody's always known that we're on the same path. So that's important.
That's great. And I do want to ask you too about some of the different ways that people become a distance grandfather or a
Yeah.
distance grandmother.
I think
I think some,
it's good
go
to be
ahead.
aware of that because we know our own circumstances, but it's good to be aware that there were all sorts of situations. And when I wrote the grandchild book, I talked about that, and I sort of I put them in an order of what I think is kind of easier to keep those grandparent-grandchild relationships thriving, and ones that are just a bit trickier. So at the easier end, we can have situations where our grandchildren go on a gap year. You call them gap years, don't you?
Yes.
Working holidays somewhere. And so they go away, they're away for a year or whatever, and then they come back. So that's pretty easy to, keep in touch. They've always known you. They lived down the road before, whatever. So that's kind of fairly easy. So those kids go away, and for a short time, you can be a distance grandparent. And then the next one is maybe when children accompany their parents on a one-off assignment overseas or some distance away. So someone gets a job, they're there for 2 years, they go away, and that one's not too bad as well, because those children remember the grandparents' home. They remember all the familiarities. And often the grandparents, they might be a little bit put out at first, but then they realize, hey, let's make the most of it. Let's go and visit. And they can be very successful. And then there's other ones, and you find them a lot in America and in other places, what I call the seasonal north-south distance grandparents. So, they're the snowbirds that go off to Florida, and then they come back for the winter or summer, vice versa. But we also have them northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere. So I met people who are English, and they have grandchildren here in New Zealand, and they spend 6 months in England and 6 months here. They're continuously chasing the sun. And same thing happens in Australia. They maybe own a caravan down here, and they put it in the driveway of their family's home. Or I even know one guy that I met, and he and his wife were permanent house sitters. So they'd come from England. They had people here that they would, look after their house and their pets, and everybody lined up their vacations around their schedule. So it's the north-south, and they're not too bad because you're there for a lot of the children's school activities. So you're there for the end of school year and all those sorts of milestones. So you get to see them in their everyday life. So that's not too bad at all. And then the next one, I think, is the next hardest, and there's lots of it in America, is where you're geographically separated, but not necessarily north and south, but east and west. So you're in different time zones. You're on the East Coast, the other's on the West Coast. And sometimes when you get into distance family type circles, sometimes these guys get forgotten. And so I'm flying the flag for the Americans and the Canadians and the Australians who have these very wide countries with multiple time zones, because it makes a huge difference. And although you have the same passport and the same language, and you're watching the same television or whatever, there's some real big obstacles there to keep everything up to for the relationships to thrive and to easily visit. So those guys have to be mentioned. And then the next one is what I call the between two worlds, and this is how our family is. So you have the local expat parent, that's my kids, they're overseas, and then you have the local American or English other partner. So all our kids married to somebody from another country. And although they all speak English, so we have a Scotsman, English, American, so everyone speaks English, but there's still really different cultures there. Our children who live in the other country with an accent kind of like mine, every time they open their mouth, doesn't matter where they go, in Atlanta, Chicago, or England, they are the other. And they have, they become very aware of their culture. But the grandchildren get brought up very much in the culture of where they are. So my kids in, Atlanta can say y'all, and they have the southern accent. And then I have grandchildren with very posh English accents. And then I have others with a Scottish lilt. So, and then we have a Kiwi one as well. So they're between worlds, and they understand that they have these grandparents in these other countries, and they learn over the years, that they are different from the ones that are local. And the next level, that's a little bit harder again, is what I call the self-initiated expatriates, or the DIYers. They're the ones who take themselves off with their family. They have found the job. They've moved themselves. They've paid for it. They've figured out the schools and the house and everything. That's a lot of work when you don't have someone helping you, like the company HR department. And then the hardest ones generally are what I call the on-the-move families. So they're the hoteliers and the academics and the missionaries and the military. So mum and dad are always on the move, and those kids have lived in multiple countries. They could have been born in multiple countries. They have this huge pile of different passports and visa complications, and sometimes when the grandparents visit, they're going to a whole different continent each time. And with that comes a whole plethora of challenges and rewards for all sides. So it can be quite hard for those children to keep those relationships up. But on the other hand, what the grandparents provide for those children who are always on the move is amazing stability. And that's one thing I picked up from my research on my last book, Being a Distance Grandchild. So those are the different circumstances. And most people tend to fall into one of those. Most families tend to fall into one of those.
That's amazing, because I think what readily came to my mind was the moving for work or the moving for retirement, right? And then you brought up all these other examples of how that distance might be arrived at. And even
Yes,
if you're a snowbird and you're somewhere close for 6 months, you're also somewhere else for 6 months.
that's right.
And so you do miss out on some of those things.
Definitely.
One of the things that is often brought up with grandparenting is that grandmothers tend to get more actively involved with the grandparenting. But I want to get your take on, what do granddads do, and how do we fit in with even the distance grandparenting of those little ones? Because I feel like grandmothers are going to be the ones that know all the little social media applications for doing the FaceTime or doing the video chats and making sure the calls, and that they know the different hours of offset that go on. And grandfathers, and I'm in this boat, are sometimes more of a, I'll pick up the phone and I don't realize that it's Wednesday morning. What's your take, and what's your perspective on the grandmother versus grandfather in that distance role?
I think without a doubt, grandmothers tend to do more grandparenting than grandfathers. Now, there's obviously exceptions to the rule, but it's pretty accepted in all, research areas that that is the case. But what I found really interesting was when I did my master's thesis, which was all about distance grandparenting in New Zealand. I had to have a very narrow topic, so it was about New Zealand. And I interviewed a bunch of distance grandparents. And what I found was that the grandfathers might not be sort of appear to be as, or even put as much time in, but they were just as committed to the whole package. And sometimes they talked more in the interviews than the woman did. So I think sometimes they just tend to let their wives or partners do what is natural and allow them to shine and allow them to be who they are and rant a rave about the whole thing. And I think that's very generous, actually. But I found that they were just as committed emotionally, just as committed to the trips and the flights and all that sort of thing. And their emotional support for their wives, who probably were the more emotional part of the package, was really important. So what I'm saying is that I acknowledge that there's a lot of unseen work done by the distance grandfathers. And the other aspect to them is that they are the ones who are sometimes left behind. And I've done a couple of, I wouldn't call them rescue trips, but I've had a couple of trips where I've gone by myself. Well, what's my husband doing back home? He's working, paying for the trip. he's making do in the kitchen. So that role, knowing that the pets are still being fed and the house is being looked after, and staying home, if that's how it works out, is really important. So I'm here to fly the flag for the grandfathers who probably don't get as much kudos as they deserve. But I've had a lot of conversations with distant grandfathers, and to me, they are right up there with the grandmothers as far as their commitment to their family. They just probably just don't talk about it as much. And maybe, yes, they don't really know how to dial up here and dial up there, but they're perfectly capable.
We can figure it out if we have to.
Exactly.
When grandma has everything already saved in the phone or on the computer, then why do I need to do that?
On the other hand, and I hear as a challenge is how exciting it would be for your adult distance child and your grandchildren to actually end up with a text or a call that comes from granddad. Man, you'd get a lot of attention. So I could then say on the other side that they would be like so impressed, so excited, but they don't tell you that.
Sure, sure. And we definitely encourage grandfathers to be active and to do those things because it does land a little differently when you have a message come across from grandfather versus grandmother. And it's not better or worse, it's different. It hits differently.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the kids want to know what granddad has to say. And I just absolutely, they love those quiet conversations. And often that means it needs to be one-on-one so that granddad's got a chance to shine. So sometimes strategizing to make that happen is a good idea for everybody.
Absolutely. And you'd mentioned talking with adult grandchildren
Mhm.
in your recently published book, Being a Distance Grandchild. You went through and, as part of the exercise, interviewed adult grandchildren. Are you able to share some of the findings or stories that grandfathers who are listening would find interesting?
Absolutely. I think one of the first things that really struck me after a while was for many of them, their grandparents had passed. I wasn't able to interview little ones who live around the world. It's just too hard ethics wise. So I talked to young people, and some of them were old enough to be grandparents themselves. But what I did sense was an amazing pride in what they had, the legacies from their grandparents. And after a while, I started to think, man, I really wish I could meet those grandparents because they probably haven't been told these lovely things. And I wish I could tell them all the lovely stories that I've received. So if you're a grandparent out there and you think, or grandfather, and you think, oh, maybe you're not having any influence, well, tell me, I can tell you that you are. It's just they don't tell you. But that was the thing that really struck me. I just wish I had been able to meet them, but some of them, really passed. But there were different things that I picked up. And I sort of gave them different names. And one of them was, I called them squirreled away love depositories. So, squirreled away love depositories are mementos, little things that you've acquired. I talked to a lady, she lives in Dubai, and she's Austrian by birth, and her grandfather is in a picture frame on her desk, in a very old, tired frame that's been around for a long time. He died when she was quite young, but she was telling me, she said, he's been on my desk and she's moved all around the world, and the same photo frame is on her desk. And she says, I feel that he's looking after me. It's sort of like he's sitting on my shoulder. Oh my goodness. I think we were both in tears, I can assure you, when we were
Right.
having that Zoom conversation. I went to the home of a South African born woman here, and all down her hallway and in another cabinet were all these photos of her grandfather from South Africa who had fought in the Boer War. And she was just so proud of her efforts. And every year, um, on what we call Anzac Day, when we recognise our fallen soldiers, she takes her family off to somewhere in New Zealand where there's a ceremony in all the little towns, and she has a plaque for the Boer War at the ceremony. She just takes it along, and I thought that's an amazing story. There are stories about what I call turning points. Now, as an example of that, as a grandparent myself, in the early days, I needed to do a crash course on like Thomas the Tank Engine, and then the next visit it was, okay, Helen, you have to get on the Hydra slide, you have to get on the highest slide and come down. And then the next visit, it's, we'd be going to a theme park or somewhere. And then the next visit, it's like, yes, I'll definitely have red wine and steak. Thanks very much. So, these are all turning points in our relationships. And a lot of them talked about that. And one of them talked about Taryn she sits in Melbourne, Australia, and she had South African connections. Her grandfather happened to be there. He died during COVID. They couldn't go for the funeral. Melbourne people were locked away like New Zealanders were. And when she talked about that, and she realized the turning point of that she hadn't really had more conversations with her granddad. He was one of those who sat in the armchair and didn't really say a lot. And she wished that she had prized more out of him. And then she realized now that her grandma was all by herself back in South Africa. And she realized that it was now that she's getting older and it was her job to be responsible and to connect with her grandmother because her grandmother's sitting all by herself. So these are turning points. That was really important. Other things are legacies. There's a lovely lady that born in the South. No, she was born actually. Her grandparents were in the South, but she was born in Washington, D.C. And her parents were ministers, religious ministers, and that faith and they, she is a white person, but they were very active in Black communities, and she learned a lot from that and watched them in their work. And she has gone on to do lots of work in different religious ministries as well. So that's a legacy from her grandparents. My husband, he's a golfer. Whenever we go to England, we play, or we go with our grandkids, we play mini golf. And this is what I call a detachable bundle of practices. What do you do every single time you catch up? So when we went to England every 2 or 3 years, we would always take the kids for mini golf, and Granddad would always win. And then Granddad would take everyone for an ice cream. And then 2 or 3 days later, they all want to do it again because they're all trying to beat Granddad. The grandkids over there are quite competitive and sporty. So we'd go again and play golf, and Granddad would always win and would always buy an ice cream. So this was something we always did. That's what I call a detachable bundle of practice. And when our grandson from England came here on a gap year a couple of years ago, for his first visit to New Zealand, and we were on a vacation and we saw a mini golf course, we just looked at each other and said, well, I think we have to do that. So these are the sorts of things that we found. And I just want to share the last one. When there was one really amazing story, and this is from an English distance grandparent, and his granddad wrote a book, one of the very only few ones in the world, about being a distance grandparent. And the funny story about it is that his daughter, so the in-between generation, his daughter is actually a publisher and an editor, and that's how I ended up publishing my first book, was through her hybrid publishing company. So then I got to meet her son, Joshua. So he's the grandchild. So when I first met Joshua online, I said, well, look, one day when I do this grandchild book, you have got to be in it. You're the son of the man who wrote the book many, many, many years ago. And so he agreed to it. But I have to read you the story about him. His granddad was, as you imagine, a writer, and Joshua's story is titled How He Found His Englishness and Found His Career. But there was just this wonderful thing at the end, and I just tell the story. I say, in a later communication, Joshua shared with me a profound reflection. I read the email while having my breakfast. My morning routine blurred into the background as I was reminded again, this time with watery eyes, what a privilege it has been to connect with distant grandchildren. Joshua wrote, now I've just got to keep my demeanor now. My grandpa got Alzheimer's the year before he died. He went downhill rapidly, but a couple of days before he passed, he had a moment of clarity. He held my hand and actually said, "You're my best friend." In many ways, I owe that special moment to all the confusion I had as my identity. This is Joshua speaking. I would love for this story to encourage any young person to realize that investing in a relationship with your grandparents is one of the most rewarding uses of your time. So, when you get privileged to stories like that, it was just absolute joy.
Absolutely. Can you hold that book up again and let's read that title out for people in case they want to look at it? It's
Well, this is I've got I'll show you here. So this is the modern version, my own one,
okay.
being a distance grandparent.
Grandparent.
And then
Gotcha.
this one is much older.
Right. It's how to be a global grandparent.
Yeah. So about a third of the book at the back is devoted to how to connect to the internet.
Okay.
All right. So it was published in 2009,
Right.
but it was one of the few books that was on the market when I did my master's. So that's how I came to acquire it. But yeah, so interesting story.
Absolutely. And, I'm glad you brought up some of these layers and some of these things with the relationships. But I know in the book, too, that we talk about the added layers of complexity. And you talk about how people's lives could be anything that a so called perfect world wouldn't consider normal. And can you talk a little bit about some of the circumstances? And then also, how do we as grandparents from a distance support both the families, the adult children, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
and the grandchildren?
Yes, this is an important topic and it doesn't affect everybody, but when it does affect them, it's huge. So how I sort of describe an added layer of complexity is when you have, a deaf child, a Down syndrome child, a child with eating disorders, a child whose sexual inclination is a little bit confused or going in a different direction right now, ADHD, eating disorders. There are so many. So if you're living overseas and your family don't live down the road and you have a child with, who is blind or whatever, you've got a lot more on your plate and you have a lot to cope with and you're trying to navigate medical things, counselor things, whatever. And it's really important that the folks back home don't belittle this and learn how to deal with it from their own situation. I have one of my grandsons in Atlanta was diagnosed during COVID when he was started school from home and with dyslexia and ADHD. And my daughter was working at home and she was working for CDC and she was working on the COVID plan. So it was a pretty tricky place at that time. So I've learned to sort of navigate his situations and people would say sometimes I find him a lot. And then other times I know that he has amazing superpowers. I had a wonderful occasion when I visited Atlanta and we timed it around the end of the school year in May because school finishes really early in Atlanta. And I got to meet the teachers at the school. And this lovely special education teacher came up to me and said to me, she said how much she loved looking after and teaching my grandson. And she said, he reminds me every time when I have the class why I took up teaching. Oh my goodness, once again, wiping the eyes, these are, these special people who make a difference. So as part of the book, I had two things. I didn't know what to do. I thought, do I write about all these different conditions, whether it's, ADHD or deafness or whatever? Do I write about them all, or do I find some experts who just talk about one or two things? And I decided to take the latter course. So I found some experts around the world who, one, knew about global mobility and about living in different countries and how that is, and also had personal experience and professional experience with added layers of complexity. One of the questions was, what is the advice for the folks back home? So first of all, and they kept on saying, they were all saying the same thing, these common denominators. One of them is don't make assumptions. Don't assume that child who wears camo gear, that girl who wears camo gear all the time wants something frilly for her birthday. Don't assume that child who never, says I can't eat ice cream can have ice cream when you want to serve it. Don't assume that. You need to, not make assumptions about situations. They also consistently said, don't judge from afar. Don't say, look, this isn't that important, or surely it's not that bad, or you're taking this too seriously, or you're just obsessed. Talking maybe to the parents of these children. Don't judge. Big one. They said, listen to the parents. Listen to the parents when they say, no, they can't eat this food, or they can't go to this place, or they can't manage this. Listen to them and follow their instructions. Offer the space for the child to be heard and to be believed. And this is a big one. The child already knows what they're coping with, and it's very easy to dismiss what a child says, but the child knows they're living it. And be continuously curious about, we should take ourselves on learning journeys. When I found out that my son was dyslexic and had ADHD, I'd always known as this really loud, out there kid. And when I found out that, I was straight off to the library. And I wanted to learn. I wanted to understand. I didn't want to assume. And, I have also a niece who has eating disorder. I've seen her being taken off to the hospital. I have a nephew who was my niece, and I have so much time for his journey. I have a cousin who adopted children from another country, and I understand or have an appreciation for their journey. And these are the sorts of situations that our adult children can have. And it's really, really important that we don't make these assumptions and we don't think we're the expert. I found a really great quote in an Australian Institute article. I'll just read it. This is what I wrote in my book. In an article from the Australian Institute of Family Studies on supporting transgender and gender diverse young people, the authors noted that for some parents, and I'd say grandparents, I would add grandparents, whether near or far, the experience can lead to personal growth, deeper emotional connection, and stronger intergenerational relationships. The same can be true for any added layer of family complexity. How we respond to these situations is deeply personal, but approaching them with openness and a willingness to grow can lead to meaningful and positive outcomes for everyone involved. And I finished that topic with another quote. I said, I finished this topic with some wise words from a lady called Selma Wasserman, who also wrote a book about being a long-distance grandparent. She wrote it in 1988, some old wisdom. And she said, don't forget that your special needs grandchild has able-bodied brothers and sisters who need to feel special too. A valuable reminder for just us, not just for the grandparents, but for the aunts and the uncles and the cousins as well. The child that's getting a lot more attention has brothers and sisters that need to be remembered as well. So I found that a really fascinating topic to write. I was challenged myself and had to think about my own messy family and came out the other end wiser and really grateful for those connections that I made. It was really profound. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you for being so open and honest with us about this. I know it's going to touch many people that are going through experiences where, as much as we want things to be perfect and be like what we see on TV or in the movies, most people's lives are not that way. And so this conversation's been very helpful. As we start to get things wrapped up, you've written a 3-book intergenerational series about this distance relationship and how it is for each one of the generations. What are some of your big picture takeaways about distance families now and how distance families might evolve into the future?
I think that one of the passions for why I did the book series was that very early in the piece, I realized that there's a lot that goes unsaid between each generations of a distance family, as in the grandparents, the away adult children, and the grandchildren. And my goal, my passion for this season of my life is to try and fill that void, Because when you don't have those conversations, because you're not just down the road and you're flying hundreds of miles and you've got limited time and the kids are there and you can't have those delicate conversations or whatever. I'm trying to fill those gaps. And a classic example is when I talk to grandparents, for example, I will often say to them, do you know that the strongest emotion that your children, your adult children, feel when they're away is the guilt of the left behind family? And most time the grandparents say, really? So I'm flying the flag for that generation because I want the grandparents to know that. So with each of the books, the subtitle is A Book for All Generations. So I'm encouraging the grandparents to read how it is for their expat migrant kids. I want the grandkids to read how it is for the grandparents, because it's in learning how it is for the other that we gain empathy. And empathy is a really good tool in your arsenal for thriving distance families. So that is what the whole passion is of why I'm doing what I've done. And so into the future, how will they succeed? They have to succeed. Successful ones are the ones where there is intentionality everywhere. Our children that are our adult children, I tell them, you're the gatekeepers. You've got the kids, you've got the busy life. The parents back home, the grandparents back home are more than happy to chat, but you need to make it happen. You need to set it up. You need to make it easy for them, as in, connect them or make times or become a booker. So intentionality is really, really important. Understanding all the different things that people are going through. If you have family right now living in Dubai or Doha, those grandparents are a bit worried at the moment. A few weeks ago, it was Mexico. So, you have to have empathy, you have to have understanding of what our different families are coping with, and be prepared to change as we get older and adjust our thinking as we go along. And always seeing this whole distance family thing, is a long-term project. I always feel for the brand new, about to become grandmother whose baby is due on the other side of the world. And she says to me, I'm so worried I won't have a relationship with that child. And all I can tell her is, you will. It's just one little step at a time, one little flight at a time, one little attempt at a phone call that turns to custard, and the next phone call's fine. A lot of patience, just keep doing it, keep doing it. And I can tell you, with 23 and 26-year-old grandkids in different parts of the world, they would vouch for the fact that you just keep doing it, and you will have thriving relationships. So yes, a lot of adaptation, a lot of intentionality.
That is fantastic insight. A final question I've got for you while we are starting to wrap things up is, what could I be doing to support the long distance grandparent that I might know in my social circle with maybe some of the challenges that they go through?
Ask how they are. Because sometimes you forget that they are a distance grandparent. It's sort of like a hidden part of them. They see your kids down the road. They see the cars come up and down the driveway. They see the car seats in the back of your car. They don't have any of that. So just taking an interest in how it is, asking how are the kids and wherever, and just realizing that they're doing their best to keep their composure. But sometimes they'll probably be a bit envious of the fact that your children, your local ones, grandkids, come round for Sunday lunch, or you get to go to church with them, or you pick them up at the school. So just being aware that your friends don't have that. But there's other times when the local grandparents have got lots of babysitting demands, and maybe a little bit more than they think. And I can tell you that some of us distance grandparents go, yippee, every Saturday night is free. So, it's not, I always think, try and make the most of it, whatever your circumstances. But it's a lovely question to ask, because when you are a grandparent and all your kids are local, you don't think about how it is. for those other grandparents? So that's a lovely question and a lovely thing to be aware of. Thank you for asking that.
You're welcome. And Helen, as we wrap this conversation up, I know I've got a lot more questions I'd love to ask you. So I'm going to go ahead and put an invitation that we get together again soon to talk more about this important subject. Is there anything I haven't asked you today that you feel impressed that you want to share with us or that you want to leave us with as we wrap this up?
No, I think that's all good. I appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate the opportunity to, to have conversations about something that's really, really common, but sitting under the radar. So I so much appreciate the fact that you're happy to have me on today and put up with my funny accent, and do your best to understand me, and know that although I'm in New Zealand and a long way away from you guys, it's not that long. It's only like a 15-hour flight. It's like.
Right.
But we're used to it. We're in the last bus stop on the world, so we're used to all that sort of thing. It's not that far. But I really appreciate the fact that although I come from a different part of the world, I share a lot of common sentiments and emotions. Whether you're sitting in Atlanta, or where you are, it's the same. I get it. Yeah. So thank you.
Well, that's fantastic. And Helen, this has been a very pleasurable experience. You've left us with a lot of great knowledge and insights about being a distant grandchild, a distant parent, and a distant grandparent. So thank you so much. And I look forward to us speaking again, probably in the very near future, I think.
That would be lovely. Let's do this again. And maybe it will be in person one day when we get to Atlanta.
If I can expense it and take it off my taxes, I'll get that flight and come see you.
Look, my husband's an accountant. That's what I might try to do.
Very good. We'll get him in and we'll figure out how we can make this work.
Absolutely. Thank you, Greg.
I had a great time talking with Helen. We really enjoyed each other's company. This was a fun conversation that we had, and I'm really looking forward and hopeful to connect with Helen on one of her trips to Atlanta in the near future. I know you've enjoyed this program, so if you have anybody in your circle of friends, your network that is a long distance grandparent, please do me a favor, share this program with them. Get them connected with Helen and her great books and her great insight on how they can really strengthen those relationships from a distance. So until next time, remember to stay cool.